Is some member seeking the call?
Speaker.
Honi Harawira.
Kia ora, Mr. Speaker. There's an old saying that if the people who make the decision to go to war were the same people who had to actually go to war, there would be a hell of a lot fewer wars, but it seems that's still not the case. Politicians make the decisions, but clearly it's other people, it's soldiers who die for those decisions. Afghanistan is not our war, and the SAS should not be going. We should not be in Afghanistan with forces who are dedicated to nothing other than to attack other people. When I hear talk about provincial reconstruction, all of that, we support that absolutely. But that's not what the SAS is being sent for. Like most Kiwis, I too admire the professionalism, the commitment and the skill that the SAS have shown in their recent deployments overseas. And like most Māori, I can't help but be proud of the achievements of our SAS because so many of them are Māori. But if I could ask a simple question, it would be, what on earth are we Māori people doing flying across to the other side of the world to fight and to kill people who are doing nothing else but defending their own homeland? We all know why the Americans want them back. In their last 3 deployments, the SAS have shown that in their specialist role as deep penetration patrol troops, they are probably the best in the world. American troops generally do one-day patrols, but our guys are out for up to a month and penetrate hundreds of kilometres into the countryside. And who are we trying to kid here, Mr. Speaker? People have been invading and trying to conquer Afghanistan for hundreds of years, and in the end they've all given up. History tells us that neither Soviet-style government nor Western-style democracy will take hold in Afghanistan. And history has shown us that even massive, huge, occupying forces are eventually ground down and forced to leave. The USSR couldn't do it, and now the USA is in there, and they won't be able to conquer Afghanistan either. We know that because already Barack Obama is talking about pulling back into the cities rather than trying to hold the countrysides because there are simply not enough troops to hold it all. And we know too that America's strategy for victory isn't based on winning hearts and minds, it's based on overwhelming and indiscriminate firepower. They apologise when they get it wrong, they pay compensation, but then they move on to the next village with the same attitude. And the higher the number of innocent civilians killed, the greater the resistance to the coalition forces. And I ask this House, Mr. Speaker, do we want to be part of that? On top of that, the Taliban themselves are quite simply dedicated and ferocious fighters. And why wouldn't they be? They have something to fight for, their families and their homeland. The world is now fully aware of how badly the Americans treat their so-called prisoners. The world knows well the stories of the torture of innocent civilians, the rendition of innocent civilians, and the untold killings of innocent civilians by American and other coalition forces. And we know clearly the response in the Middle East to those who come into their homelands to rape their resources, kill their people and take over their lands. We've seen it in New York, we've seen it in London, we've seen it in Bali, and we nearly saw it in Sydney. And so again I ask the question, do we really want to be part of that? Yes, we can play a role, and we are playing a role in provincial reconstruction in Afghanistan, and New Zealand forces are gaining kudos from both coalition and Afghani commentators for their skills, their commitment, and their ability to help communities to rebuild. But the answer to ending the war in Afghanistan is simple. The answer is for the USA and all other coalition forces to get out of Afghanistan, and sooner rather than later. Western firepower will not outlast the rage of the people of Afghanistan who want all outsiders out. They will win, and the United States already knows it to be true. Only the Afghan people can ultimately determine what sort of government, if any, they want to have, and we have no right to try to impose a system of government on them that they have clearly shown that they do not want. Mr. Speaker, in the lead up to the SAS decision, John Key said that whatever decision we make has to be made here in New Zealand and what is perceived to be in the best interests of New Zealand. That is who I answer to, that is the New Zealand public. They are the people entitled to that answer, nobody else. Well, the Māori Party has to question whether interfering in external disputes outside of our own territory is in the best interests of any New Zealander. The government has announced it will send more than 200 SAS soldiers to Afghanistan, and we know many of these will be Māori. We also know that the SAS will not be deployed in a peacekeeping role. They are, quote, the premier combat unit of the New Zealand Defence Force. This group, the SAS, will join other special forces which have been described as hunter-killer units. We hold true to our previous statements that denounce the glorification of war. We do not support our soldiers overseas fighting and killing civilians or aiding others to do so. So why should we send our own to their aid? The military role that our government has had in Afghanistan in the recent past has been covert in nature, and we'd suggest it is not about what is best for the people of Afghanistan. Our overseas aid money is being used by the military to wage war on innocent people. We actually do care about the welfare of innocent victims of war, and so we support the announcement of more civil aid as an approach to supporting people. The United States acting ambassador said in the weekend there was tremendous international respect for New Zealand efforts in Afghanistan. New Zealand Defence Force personnel in Afghanistan do an excellent job in running a provincial reconstruction team that is used as a model for others. NATO routinely invites others to go and look at what New Zealand is doing and try to imitate that elsewhere. About 140 Defence Force members have been operating the provincial reconstruction team in Bamiyan province since 2003. Given this, it defies belief why the Prime Minister would recommend that the provincial reconstruction team be drawn down. The PRT is about making a practical difference. Infrastructure. In terms of our international responsibility, every nation should examine its role in the so-called war on terror, and we do need to correct that phrase, because it is no longer a war on terror, it's a war of terror. And we would have preferred that the Minister of Defence consulted tangata whenua on overseas deployments to fight the so-called terrorism. What you call terrorism depends on who you are and where you stand. What you call terrorism depends on things like, I have a poster in my office, Mr. Speaker, which has got a photo of 4 Apaches, Geronimo, Janusa, Chapo, and Fun, in the desert, all armed with muskets and rifles. And the caption to that photo reads, Homeland Security, fighting terrorism since 1492. The photo makes it absolutely clear who they are and where they stand. They're no ordinary US citizens. They are tangata whenua, and they have considered themselves to be fighting a war of terror against them ever since the Americans, the British moved in and started taking over their homelands. And when our SAS troops confront their enemy in Afghanistan, it's unclear to me who's maintaining homeland security and who exactly is fighting terrorism. Mr. Speaker, we do ourselves a grave injustice by being seen to be complicit in a war of terror against the people of Afghanistan. If we can help through provincial reconstruction, then we will support that. We will not support the sending of our premier combat unit, the SAS, back into Afghanistan, whose role is defined very much by the American military presence and American military direction.
Same position as Labour.
Kia ora tātou katoa.
Same position as Labour.